The following are long-term and short-term influences on France's involvement in World War I.
So between 1871 and 1914, France's population grew from 36 million to 40 million. This is significant because the population growth allowed France to have plenty of soldiers for defense during the war. This also is significant because compared to Germany's population growth of 41 million to 67 million, because France's smaller population caused less domestic disputes, and France was able to better focus on the war. Food was also easier distributed throughout France's smaller population, leading to less starvation in France than Germany. Additionally, until 1914, France's population had 45% of farmers, and this is significant because the abundance of farmers created a more stable food supply in France than other countries during World War I. The large lower class population and reliance on the lower class is significant because the lower class is drafted faster, which led to instability from the base of the nation, which spread throughout the war.
France's economy had limited industrial influence until 1914, to the point where 90% of France's industrialized businesses employed 5 or less workers until 1914. This is significant because, compared to other industrialized nations, France had a greater percentage of its raw resources still available for usage throughout the war. But in contrast to these industrialized nations, France had limited weaponry available at the beginning of the war and took longer to produce new weaponry.
The French military was strengthened by an increased number of training centers and journals dedicated to soldiers' education in the late 1800s. Also, the development of the 75mm field gun proved to be superior to other weapons. However, the officer corps was a socially mixed group, and many did not make it past the captain rank, which, as seen in the diagram, is only the third rank. However, the strengths of the military outweigh the weaknesses. Before World War I, France fought in the Crimean War, the Franco-Austrian War, and the Franco-Prussian War. In the Crimean War, France was fighting with allies against Russia. In the Franco-Austrian War, France was fighting with Sardinia against Austria. And in the Franco-Prussian War, France was fighting against Germany. In both the Crimean War and the Franco-Austrian War, France saw victory with their allies. However, they saw defeat in the Franco-Prussian War against Germany. This is significant because all these wars were relatively close together, so France had little time to recover. Also, they only saw success when they were paired with an ally. France practiced imperialism in Africa prior to World War I. The dark green regions on the map show French colonies. This is significant because France still felt the need to colonize other territories while losing some of their own, namely the Alsace-Lorraine region from the Franco-Prussian War.
After the fall of Napoleon III and the Second Empire, the Third Empire of France was established. This empire ran from September 4th of 1870 to July 10th of 1940. This empire consisted of the Senate and Chamber of Deputies, headed by the President of the Republic, and the Ministry, headed by the President of the Council, or the Prime Minister. Leading up to World War I, President of the Council was Raymond Poincaré, from 1913 to 1920. There were 4 presidents of the Republic between the start of Poincaré's term and the start of World War I. Those being Aristide Briand, Louis Barthou in 1913, and Gaston Doumergue and Alexandre Ribot in 1914. All of these men only served for a few months because of the tensions leading up to World War I. And they were all members of Republican parties, those being the Republican Socialists, the Republican Democrats, the Radical Socialists, and the Republican Federation. This was a contrast to earlier in the empire, when these positions were filled by monarchists, showing the gaining popularity of having a Republican style of government. President of the Council, Raymond Poincaré, had a great influence on France's role in World War I. He believed war was inevitable and having allies made France stronger. Following this belief, he told Russia that France would uphold the Franco-Russian alliance in August 1912. Then, in November 1912, he made joint military plans with Britain and a promise to consult with Britain in the case of war. His immense need for allies came from fear of Germany because of the German overthrow of Napoleon III in 1870, and because he wanted Alsace and Lorraine back, which Germany obtained after the Franco-German War.
Regarding foreign relations, France was involved in the Triple Entente alliance of 1907. Prior to this, France allied with Russia in 1894 and later Britain in 1904. The timing of the alliances are important to note here, as 40 years prior, France was fighting in the Crimean War against Russia. These prior conflicts convinced Germany that France would not ally with Russia. However, these two nations recognized Germany's growing power and decided to collaborate. France's enemies during this time were the Triple Alliance, which was formed in 1882, involving the countries Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy.
The Franco-Russian alliance developed quickly and somewhat unexpectedly. Germany and Russia shared a mutually beneficial relationship until the late 1800s, when Germany's policy towards Russia strained that relationship. These tensions caused Russia to change its political alliance from Germany to France. This alliance began with France giving Russia economic aid primarily through loans and military advice, especially during the Russo-Japanese War. This casual alliance quickly changed into the promise of military aid in the event of a war, specifically with Germany or Italy. The formation of the Anglo-French Entente was triggered through territorial disputes in Africa. The first of these disputes was the Fashoda incident, where Britain and France were looking to colonize the same area in Africa. This caused the forced cooperation of Britain and France, and consequently strengthened their relationship as opposed to deteriorating it. Later disputes in Africa arose from Germany's increased colonial desires. Germany's global influence was continually increasing, leading France and Britain to the perspective that they needed to cooperate to limit Germany's power. There were no short-term causes for France's involvement in World War I. It was simply keeping its long-term promises of the Triple Entente alliance with Britain and Russia.